Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's Maynard, Mike, Colin, and Colton, and we've got a fantastic show for you today. I know I always say that. First of all, I'm in India, so I got to say good morning, I think. I'm not even sure what time it is over here. We're going to be with the Sierra folks this week and hopefully get to do a couple of interviews and give you a little perspective on what's going on in India. But before we get to any of that later in the week, we've got a fantastically timed show with the team from Apache. We've got Castlen Kennedy and Gary Clark. Hi, Gary. Hi, Castlen. Thanks for joining. We reached out to Apache because we kept hearing about the tree grant program, and it's pretty stunning. I don't want to steal the thunder, but the scope of it, the history of it, the impact of it, it's really quite cool. But as it turns out, so there's some other things going on. Castlen, I'm getting ahead of myself, but there's some other things going on that they'll tell you about. So it's perfect timing. So we'll come back to you guys in just a second. Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Castlen. We're really fired up. Mike Bradley, what would you tell us to get our juices flowing? It looks like you've added a couple more fire trucks to me. Is that, you have a red one now? Anything you want to report?
Well, I think it's always been hiding behind me, so maybe I put a different view up today. So, and it definitely doesn't mean that the markets are red. I mean, if you look at what's going on, crude continues to maintain, a price above 80. WTI is between 82 and 83 today, and natural gas has had a bit of a rebound today. A couple of things I wanted to really point out today is something we shared in our recent strategist note, which kind of is a little bit concerning to us, but it's this chart that we see here. We put this out, and as most people that are energy generalists and have been energy generalists over the last 20 years, every time you see one of these economist covers comes out, you get frightened because they tend to be often the wrong direction. And this one just came out last week, the energy shock. Obviously we've been talking about this, Colin and I, for a while. This is what's occurring. They've noticed it. That typically is not a good sign when they start to notice something because they tend to be sort of top tickers. Compare and contrast, this is the one that they had literally a couple months back or, late last year. And it talked about how clean energy will, remake geopolitics. Again, they were, sort of wrong there. And I was just going to point out this is what we had in 1999 and 2003, basically saying it's the end of the oil era. And as this chart shows, this is when they said that we're drowning in oil. This is when they said at the end of the oil era. This is when they basically said, new market, oil's not going to go anywhere. And now here where they're talking about an energy shock. And so I think that concerns us a little. And in the last slide I'll talk about is, everyone's been talking about natural gas as well. As you can see in this chart, gas has had a fantastic run. A lot of it's been on the back of what's going on in Europe. And all I'd say is a couple things. One, I think what's going to happen with gas right now, gas is obviously going to be driven by what happens with winter weather. But what I'd also point to is that gas near term is going to be driven by technical support levels. And I'd say if you look at the 50-day moving averages around 487, it really hasn't been below this 50-day for quite a bit of time. And if it breaks through there, then I think it's probably going to fall pretty hard. And so that's something to keep in mind because it's really, really been strong as of late. And the one thing that this points out, and some of those other economist charts that I showed you are going to point out is, and we've been talking about it for a while, I mean, winter is really going to determine where crude oil prices go and where natural gas prices go early next year. We don't think they're going to really move up or down dramatically, but clearly, if weather is not cold, which I think the market is dialing in, you're going to probably have some downside in Q1 of next year. So that's something to be thinking about if you're a producer or an energy investor. So just wanted to kind of show that. That's what we've been talking about this last week on our energy strategist note. And, besides that, everything still looks good. And one thing I'd also say is today was the first day of earnings report. Halliburton reported, and so we'll see the rest of the big three report this week as well. So everything's centered on those guys, what they're saying. We're not going to hear much of them talking about, E&Ps raising capital budgets. They mentioned about how privates are really spending here, make up 60% of the rig count right now, and that's all fair and true. but we're not going to hear public E&Ps talking about higher budgets this year. That's going to be more of something that happens next year, but all eyes are kind of fixated on those big three this week.
So, Mike, one question and one clarification. I know you said if we get a mild winter, you obviously have some downside in oil and gas price. But the scenario where you have a strong or even above average winter, isn't that potentially really messy in terms of how high prices might go?
Yeah, I'd say that's right. But what I'd say is, and Colin can talk about this, as he looks at futures. I think the market's already assuming there's going to be some, the weather is going to be cold. Now, how cold it is, I think the market's more assuming it's going to be a normal to a colder winter as opposed to a warmer winter right now. And so if the latter happens, then you're going to have some downside. We're not talking about catastrophe or anything like that. We're just talking about prices are going to come lower. They're probably going to come back to more normalized levels. And that's fine, but that's something to be worried about at this point in time. And that's why I show the economist covers, because they typically have gotten it wrong. And the markets right now are assuming things are going to be a little bit tight going into winter. And if they don't play out that way, then we're going to have some problems, at least temporarily. It's not the end of the world. It's just a pullback.
So there's my question now. My clarification is you mentioned private companies as a percent of the rig count. Do you want to give us that number again? Make sure we all have that.
Halliburton today mentioned it was 60% of the rig count, and which is pretty big, and they obviously are picking up rigs and continue to pick up rigs based on economics. But and I would imagine you're going to see over the next quarter or so that's going to continue to grow as a percent of the total rig count. They pointed it out; it's something new, and it is what it is.
It's a big number. Okay, Colton, jump in here. You guys have been doing a lot of work for a long time now in the renewable and power and the broad space, and I know you've got a good update for us.
Yeah, thanks, Maynard. So maybe a good segue actually from what Mike was mentioning there. Really what we're trying to do is better integrate our existing natural gas work with our renewable power coverage to provide a more comprehensive view of power markets. So to that end, it's worth taking a look at the relationship between the run we saw in natural gas and coal this summer and the relative performance of the renewable fleet. So if we look at longer dated trends, we've continued to see renewable share of the power stack increase, although we are starting from a small base. In March and April of this year, we reached just under a quarter of U.S. power derived from renewable resources. Hydro does typically benefit in the spring from snowmelt, and you also have seasonally strong wind resource. So prior to June this year, we were trending at about 22% year to date coming from renewable resources. It compares to a little under 20% for the same period in 2019. So not dramatic absolute numbers, but a healthy growth rate certainly. June and July, that's where we saw a true reversal. So, wind resource really fell off amidst the heat waves that we saw across a large part of the country, particularly the central corridor in the U.S. We do have higher concentrations of wind power, typically also have higher capacity factors as well. So, since that July trough, though, we have seen output recover. So we're seeing wind generation showing a healthy rebound through August and into September. Typically, the winter is quite a bit stronger as temperatures decline, air density increases. We'll be keeping an eye on those wind trends specifically as we move into November and December, see if that takes a little bit of pressure off thermal sources to meet that demand ramp.
All right, awesome, Colton. Well, Colin, your friend Jamie, heard we were broadcasting live from India. He's the reason this whole thing is happening in India. But there he is, a couple of Massachusetts guy. Jamie, anything for the crowd on your India show? How many people are coming?
We'll have about 500 people here live and around 7,000, 6,000 or 7,000 virtually.
Fantastic.
So it's a great event, and you're all welcome. Everyone on this call is welcome to join.
All right. Well, you heard it here first. Colin, as we turn to the Apache team, what would you tell us to get our juices flowing?
Well, first of all, hey, Jamie, good to see you. And secondly, just picking up on Mike's point about magazine covers being lagging indicators for markets. I think all of us looking at newspapers and magazines around the world can see that there is now broad and sustained interest in energy prices. And we're seeing questions about the probability of crude oil prices getting to $100. We're seeing people ask questions that they haven't asked for 5 or 6 years. How high can prices go? What damage could it do to economic activity and so on? So let me just answer two of the questions. The probability of seeing a $100 WTI oil price, according to the futures and options markets, by summer of 2022 is now 17%. And as I said last week, that's a conditional probability. As new information comes in each day, we'll get a refreshed view on that probability. A week ago, the flat price of WTI was $80.50. Today, it's 83. So that can give you kind of a sense of how a 15% probability became 17. But in a caution from the gas market, kind of echoing what Mike was just saying, take a look at this table. You're looking at the options assessed probability of NYMEX natural gas prices at expiry for various futures contracts. And in particular, I just want to draw your attention to the November 21 contract and the April 22 contract. The November contract will expire in 8 days next Wednesday. It's currently priced at around $5 per MMBTU. And the market says there's about an even risk at expiry of seeing a price below or above $5. Only a 3% probability of seeing a price below $3.75 with such a limited amount of time to go before expiry. But look at April 22. It's priced around $4 per MMBTU, or about $1 below the prompt, but it has a 78% perceived probability of pricing below 5 and about a 53% probability of pricing below $3.75 when it reaches its own expiry at the end of March 2022. So here is empirical support for Mike's caution, the wisdom of the grizzled veteran who has seen many of this before over the last 20 years. And options traders are very much endorsing his caution that when everybody is beginning to freak out about oil and gas prices, pay attention to the fact that the gas demand rationing has already begun in Europe. It's already pricing in a normal to colder than normal winter. And we have to be cautious here that whether it's a fundamental reason or a interest rate hike or some other reason, that the risk towards lower natural gas prices is mounting as we head into winter.
Well, awesome, Colin. That is a great lead in. Again, we've introduced them, but they're so good, we'll introduce them twice. We've got Gary Clark from IR over at Apache, and Castlen Kennedy, who runs corporate affairs and PR and communications and all that. Castlen's been at the company since 06, Gary since 14, but the two of them know anything and everything that's going on with the company in terms of not just the tree program, but all their ESG efforts, all their communications efforts, really all the stuff that's going on that energy investors are talking about these days. They know it. So Gary and Castlen, it's great to have you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
It's good to be here.
And I think the history of today's session is just somewhere in our travels. We ran into people who were talking about the Apache Tree Grant Program. And it feels like the nature-based solutions to climate just don't get enough press. And, once we reached out to you and heard some details about it, we thank you so much because we can't wait to share so much of what you're doing with the rest of the world. So that's a really long lead in, but Castlen and Gary, why don't I turn it over to you guys? Just let's nose into it and start talking about the tree program.
We started the tree program in 2005, and it was one of the first projects I was given when I started in 2006. So it's been over 15 years now. And in fact, the tree grant program is now 16 years old.
Wow.
So it's, I can tell you a little bit about the tree grant program. And I think the other thing we'd love to talk about too is that, that program fits into a much broader strategy at Apache. And Gary can talk about that because obviously there's a lot of focus on ESG and the way we think about not only, environmental issues, but community issues and the way we engage with our communities. But I'll start with the tree grant program. It's an interesting story, and it really starts with Raymond Plank, the founder of Apache. Raymond was a conservationist at heart, had done a lot of his own work on really understanding environments in particular in some of the areas where Apache had operations, and had taken a real particular liking to a part of the country in the West, in Wyoming specifically, and had done a lot of research kind of on high plains environments, and had started doing some work around plantings there. And it eventually grew into a commitment and a program where he realized there was a real opportunity. Trees, I think today we talk about trees, and certainly they're very, it's real popular to talk about them in the context of carbon, as a carbon offset and a carbon sink. But the reality is, trees provide some really basic benefits to communities, from beautification to disaster recovery to shade. They help purify the water system, certainly purify the air system. So there are all sorts of benefits and all sorts of reasons why different communities lined up to partner with us when we started to really get this program off the ground. So just high level statistics, the program's in its 16th year. We've given away about 4.8 million trees across 17 states to over 900 different nonprofit organizations. Last week, we announced the latest grant awards. So over 50 organizations, really focused in 3 main states where Apache has operations. And these projects vary from, a local elementary school here in Houston that gets a handful of trees to very large partnerships where we're doing reforestation work for habitat restoration in places like Louisiana. And so small projects, big projects across the board, just really great partnership. And it turns out, to your point, Maynard, there is a tremendous carbon benefit. I can't say that's why we started it, and it's not something that we're currently officially getting credits for, but it is obviously one of the benefits of a program like that.
I mean, it's so amazing. We think back to 2005. We kind of had the Barnett Shale. That was pretty much it. But we were running out of natural gas, and we sure weren't, moving towards being the world's largest oil producer. So and ESG, I don't think we knew those initials yet. So it was definitely a completely different era. Do you get a lot of calls from other companies wanting to know how you did this, how you do it, how they could do it? Like what type of interactions do you have like that?
We do have people that ask, but I will be totally honest with you. It's actually a lot of work because what we've done has been, we don't just write a single check to a large organization and say, here's some money, go give away trees, to whatever. It's a very comprehensive program. We have an application process. We do a lot of marketing to encourage different organizations to apply. They submit an application. We have minimum requirements. We have to review all of those. We look for opportunities where we feel confident that the entity receiving the trees has a plan to take care of them, so that the survivability rate will be high. And then we look for opportunities, that we feel are unique or will meet some need within that specific community. And so it's a pretty thorough process. I think, I laugh because early on when we first started working on it, we weren't really sure how we were going to do it. And the original goal that Raymond gave the team was 1 million trees. And I think the first year we gave away 3,000. And it was funny because the first year I thought, well, maybe, we'll start with schools. Schools need trees. And we actually sent letters to every principal in HISD, elementary schools, middle schools, high schools. And we realized that, some of them were very excited and we had some good responses, but they all wanted, 3 or 5 trees. And so we realized after that season that probably was not going to be an efficient way to get to 1 million trees. So we had to really kind of rethink how we thought about the program, the types of partners. And so we started to get real proactive in looking for big partnerships. We still do the schools. The schools are fun. There's always like a nice volunteer component where our employees can go out and help plant the trees. But yeah, so it's been, I think when folks ask us about it and then they learn that there was actually there's a lot of labor behind it, they think, oh, yeah, that might not be the perfect opportunity to copy. But
yeah, and Maynard, we can get into a little bit of the numbers, but the reality about a tree program is, it's great if everybody starts one today. That would be a wonderful thing. But really, the best time to have started a tree program was 15 years ago, and an even better time would have been 30 years ago, because as when the trees are saplings and they're young, they don't sink much carbon. But of course, now we're seeing the benefit of the investment that we made 15 years ago. And so, it happened. It started as a conservation effort. Now we get the benefit of the carbon sink.
It is interesting, Castlen. You get this impression because none of us. I wish TPH had a tree program. We don't. But you have this impression that it is, people are writing checks. I mean, you don't really know what's going on. And you're pointing out it's obviously a ton of work to do it right and have partners and make sure the trees live. And I guess a lot of the employees, it sounds like they get involved. Or what would you say about what it's done internally to Apache?
Yeah, sure. There have been a couple of ways we've engaged employees around the program. Probably one of our biggest partners historically has been the city of Houston. So we've planted trees at all of the major parks in Houston. In Memorial Park in particular, we've done very recurring plantings every Arbor Day. And so that's always created a great opportunity for employees to come out with young children, teach them about the importance of trees, teach them how to plant a tree. So there's certainly been that piece. We also, for many years, had a program called Trees for Tots, where we actually donated a tree for children or employees who had a child during the previous year. And the mayor historically has come out to that. So good event. Those trees are still there. That's the great thing about trees. You can always go visit your trees. My kids have trees at Memorial Park. We go see them. So it's a cool experience.
Gary, we're in here. You started in 2005. You're up to 5 million trees. Where did it cross over and start becoming something that it grew into the ESG report, if you will? Or when did it start becoming part of your sustainability discussion?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. It was always a kind of a talking point for us. I mean, it was a point of pride. It was something that the employees have a lot of pride in, and it's just a feel-good thing to do. So we had it as part of our sustainability report every year, but it was just sort of one of the things that we did. I don't know that we ever intentionally shined a big spotlight on it, but we actually started to look at some numbers this year, and we said, well, let's take a look and see what is the carbon impact. We went back and forth. We've never had these numbers certified, so we would want to caveat all of this, but when we looked at it, and Castlen and I kind of ran the numbers and talked about some of the deltas around this, we said, this actually has a real impact. And she's got some numbers if you're interested, but I think we've never emphasized this in a report because, as I said, we haven't had the numbers independently certified, but it's meaningful, and it'll become, starting today with this podcast or webcast, it'll become a talking point for us. So.
Yeah, and I think I want to caveat against this again. Gary mentioned these are all internal, and you have to make a lot of assumptions around this. You have to make assumptions for how many are going to live, and all of that good stuff. But here kind of
Castlen, I'm realizing we need the CO2 safe harbor, language to go up right now.
And like I said, we're not trying to claim any credit for this or offset anything, but if we've run the numbers. So Apache's 2020 CO2 emissions, these are scope 1 emissions, globally are just over 6 million tons. In the US, it's just over 1 million tons. And again, that's scope 1 for last year, 2020. If we look at over the 15 years of planting trees and the life of those 4.8 million trees that are obviously at various stages of growth and height and width and whatnot, that currently is sinking about 16% of our US emissions or 3% of our global emissions. And on one hand, I think the 16% number that's notable. Took 15 years to get there. On the other hand, though, it makes you realize too that trees, they're not the end all be all of all solutions. Like that's a lot of trees to get to that impact.
Your comment though, Castlen, I know we all kind of throw it around, but this notion of all of the above, or, we're going to do a lot of things. There's not going to be a single thing that improves all this. And that's a really meaningful number. Are you thinking about doing it? I know you said 17 states. Do you think about doing it in Egypt or other places around the world? Like, where do you see the program 3, 5, 7 years from now?
I definitely think there's an opportunity to do some things in our international areas. Some of them are maybe more naturally friendly to trees. The Western Desert of Egypt may not be one of those places, but certainly in the UK, in Suriname, There may be some opportunities. Again, because of the way we approach the program and the way we manage it, it's very it's labor intensive. And it's very thoughtful. So we would have to have the right infrastructure on the ground, the right resources and partners in order to execute on the plan. But I definitely think that's something that we're looking at.
Yeah. And, for as great of a program reforestation is, you get more bang for the buck focusing on deforestation. And to this extent, you can prevent the deforestation of mature trees. That's a massive carbon win for everybody. And so that's another aspect of this that we could all turn some attention to. And if we could move the needle even just a little bit there, it would be huge.
No, it's a great point, Gary. It seems like the tree equivalent of, can we please not shut down existing nuclear plants? Like, why are we doing that? Colin, you're coming off mute. Looks like you've got something.
Yeah, I guess Apache had some other big announcements this week about 2021 objectives that were intentional and not just about beautification and habitat. Could you tell us a little bit about that and where it's heading?
Sure. Yeah, well, we made a commitment this year to eliminate all U.S. onshore routine flaring, which we've done. We made that announcement last week. And we also targeted a reduction in our flaring intensity in the U.S. onshore to less than 1%. The year is not over yet, but we're well below that target as well. So we made tremendous progress there. And Castlen can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we may be the first of our peers to eliminate all routine flaring in the U.S. onshore. So very proud of that. It was an aggressive objective, and we accomplished it about 3 months early.
Just going to congratulate you. It's fantastic. I know it's a ton of work throughout the whole organization, so you're to be commended. Well done.
Yeah, it's really exciting. I think for us, the routine flaring opportunity was something that we recognized late last year, was something where we could really focus in on and have an impact on that. And this came from the top, and it was something that leadership really communicated to employees across the board that this was going to be a priority for us. And we had to assess our operations and figure out why was routine flaring happening, and then ultimately come up with solutions to get that gas to market. And so that was a real important focus for the year. I will tell you, it was also part of our corporate goals, which are tied to employee comp. So every Apache employee's short-term incentive was linked to achieving that goal, and some of our other ESG goals. In fact, 20% of our comp is calculated based on ESG-related goals. So I think we're real proud of it. We definitely think it's certainly starting a conversation among the industry about addressing the routine flaring problem is doable. It takes time and effort, and in some cases, it does take a little bit of money, but I think certainly in the midst of this gas market, that's helping it a little bit. But yeah, we're real proud of it.
Gary, I know when folks see this, it'll be Wednesday morning in the U.S., and we will be within an hour or so of you putting out your new sustainability report for 2021. Anything you would tease us a little bit with that report? What should we look for? What are you most excited about? Get us fired up for that thing.
Yeah, well, I think we probably already broke the headline news, which was the big goal we've achieved this year. I think that report will really lay out our philosophy. We took a step back in this year and we really said, where do we want to focus? Because as an organization, we are bombarded with constituents that want us to focus in all kinds of places on this ESG conversation. And so what we did was we really stepped back and to try to focus our employees and focus our resources. And we said, what are the areas that we can really concentrate efforts on and move the needle? And the three areas, we call them our three ESG pillars, are air, water, and our communities and people. And so we established goals, the compensation linked goals that Castlen spoke to around each of those pillars every year. And so we organize the report, and we'll talk about the report in the context of what we're doing to move the needle in each of those three categories. And so we've organized this as kind of a look back on what we accomplished in 2020 and a little bit of a peek forward as to where we might be headed in 2021.
This incentives and driving results with incentives. It seems like so much of this climate / ESG / improve the world discussion is just not based enough in market forces and incentives. And I think this India conference is going to have a lot of that kind of stuff. So we'll be listening for it. One question, guys, because I don't think people have a sense of it. To produce a sustainability report like you're going to come out with on Wednesday, just how many hours, how many people? I mean, that takes an entire organization. Castlen, your face says, "Oh gosh," But I mean, give us a feel for it because we know it's not easy.
That look was probably because Castlen is spending way too much time with me lately on this. It's a collaborative effort and a lot of hours.
Yeah, I mean, we have the way that we really manage sustainability and ESG is by a committee. So we have different leaders across the organization that take ownership for different parts of the strategy and the execution of that strategy. And we've had, I think, over the years, the group has evolved and the number of people that engage and contribute to the report has evolved. But I would guess, it is probably over 50 Apache employees that participate in some cases, many, many hours in helping to pull the data together, help write it, help put it together. There's a lot of review, as you can imagine. Obviously, we want this to be best foot forward. We need it to be very accurate. We need it to be all things that we can confirm and stand behind. And so all of those things are really important. And then Gary and I have, the task of helping kind of pull the messaging together and really think about externally how we're going to communicate those things. So it's a lift. And I will tell you, we probably will start working on the next one in the next couple of weeks.
Wow.
And I think part of that too is you have these very defined reports that come out that are very specific to an annual data set. So obviously we're reporting 2020 data in this, but there's also a lot around the strategy and communicating how it came to be. So there's also an effort, in addition to just putting together a big document, and how do you continue to communicate and evolve that story and that strategy over time and share that along the way.
I mean, it seems like if you only go back a few years, the ESG report was the secondary report, and some companies had them and some companies didn't. Today, it seems like not only do people have them, I mean, they rival the annual report, do they not, in just terms of intensity and person hours to get them done, or am I getting carried away?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say, Mayor, they've probably displaced the annual report. I mean, the annual report has become, a CEO letter and a wrap around the financials. And so this is really the new annual report. And that's how we think about it. And I would say that there's probably more man hours, more collaboration between teams within APA that work on this report than the annual report.
Well, I think we always look for a tagline on these. I mean, the tree program is so great. I don't want to take anything away from it, but the new annual report, that's a pretty juicy one. Castlen, one thing for you personally, I know you just went on Governor Abbott's, the State Energy Plan Advisory Committee. And so congratulations. And as a Texan, I'm delighted that we got someone of your quality. Anything you would tell us about that? How excited are you? We promise not to complain to you about our power. That was the deal, if I could ask this question.
I think, that committee is part of a much broader effort that the PUC and the Railroad Commission are working through now as it relates to the legislation that was passed during the session in the aftermath of Storm Uri back in February. And so I think certainly there's a pretty diverse group of folks that will be part of that committee, all bringing different perspectives from energy markets to the table. I'll certainly want to come with the natural gas perspective and the upstream and midstream perspective to kind of share what our experiences were during the storm and ultimately move all of us as a state closer to preventing anything like that from ever happening again. And so this specific committee will be working over the course of next year to ultimately deliver some recommendations to the legislature. But there are a lot of parts of that legislation, SB3, that are already being implemented. I think the PUC rules go into effect here next month. So lots of things that they're working on in Austin to try to get their arms around that and ultimately come up with solutions.
One question I meant to ask this when we were talking about it before is, could you give us a feel for the rollout of a sustainability report? Meaning, like, I would have guessed if you just asked me, like, well, that means you're going to almost like go on a road show, in particular, I think of the passive investors you have as being more focused on that, but everybody's focused on it, not to take away from the others. But is there anything about how you're going to roll this out that the rest of us can learn from or just understand better?
Well, actually, I think we'd like to thank you, Maynard, because this is couldn't think of a better launch for the report than to have this opportunity to come on. And
well, you're too nice. That looks like a setup now, but we just got so lucky that you guys came on. So thank you.
It was serendipity. And as Castlen and I talked about it, we're energized and excited to talk about the trees, but we also thought, hey, this would be a great introduction to kind of the rollout of the report. And so that's part of it. I think Castlen's team on the PR side has quite a few things that they'll do on their side, and let her speak to that.
Yeah, I think obviously we'll do all the standard, we'll press release it, we'll roll out some new things on our website, particularly because the report is so comprehensive. We try to put together some bite-sized pieces. So if you're very interested in governance or you're very interested in issues related to community engagement, we'll have that type of kind of smaller bite-sized pieces for you. But I also think part of the takeaways, the high-level key messages from the report will be thread throughout our engagements over the course of the year. We do a slide now on all of our IR decks on our ESG accomplishments and goals. So that we'll update that for the investor community. I'm sure it will start to come up in some of the investor meetings. And then we also spend a lot of time communicating internally around the sustainability report and more importantly, the strategy that we're discussing in the sustainability report for our employees to make sure they understand what those commitments are. They understand the direction for both the board and the leadership team with regard to what's important and what we're working towards. And so we'll do some employee town halls around that. We'll put together some materials around that. So both the internal and external audiences are really important for the report.
And just a last question, because I can't help myself. I'm just curious. Maybe I had too much coffee on the plane. Are you finding investors, because these reports, they often have, they're unique to each company. And so, Liberty Resources has a really unique one. Phillips 66 has one. You've got your new one. Are they starting to get them out and compare them to each other and say, how come you didn't say this? Or I don't, is the community getting like that? Or is it still pretty much everybody is, these are my words, not yours, but everybody's kind of handcrafting their own, how they want to do it?
Yeah, I think from the investor perspective, they're starting to take a differentiated look. It's funny, Castlen and I were talking the other day about the opportunity to, and you'll probably know a little bit about this, Maynard, to apply some AI to all the reports out there and to get a pretty intelligent read as to where we may be strong and where some of our messaging may be not quite as strong as our peers, and that can point us to where to focus for the next year. So I think a lot of tools like that will be coming out. At first it was third-party services and scorecards. What we're seeing now is a shift in the investor base. Many of them have now staffed up and have the resources to analyze these reports more closely. And to put direct resources on it and directly engage as opposed to rely on a third party. So we're seeing a lot more of that. And I think we expect that to continue to evolve. And we welcome that because we like those interactions and those conversations. It helps us get better. It gives us ideas. I think it just improves the whole process when you take sort of that third party scorecard system out of it a little bit that was designed frankly, to be a bit of a profit center initially for many, and you put it directly into the hands of the investors. So we're seeing much more of that, and I think we'll continue to see that trend.
I would add to that our report is full of tables and data, and if that's what you want and you want to compare us We have all of that and we report it in standardized forms. So we follow many of the templates. In fact, one of our large trade associations, AXPC, now offers a template that large independent producers all follow. So we're reporting the same data with the same metrics using, same calculation and methodology. But in addition to that, to the data and the tables, we also have narrative, and we tell you a little bit about our thinking behind some of it. We attach stories to the experiences that we've had, the things we've learned from, the ways we've engaged with employees, communities. Obviously, a big focus of this report looks at how we managed through the pandemic. And so a lot of personal story as well to bring some of those tables and numbers to life. So if you like that kind of thing, it's in there. And if you just want to look at the tables, it's in there too.
Well, it really sounds fantastic, guys. We can't thank you enough for, as I say, we were drawn to the trees and we had no idea it started that long ago. And then, we kind of feel like we hit the jackpot with the recent flaring announcement and the sustainability report. So we're excited. Everybody, if you're watching this, go get a copy of this report and read it right away.
Thank you.
Thank you for,
Thanks,
yeah,
man.
thank you so much for joining us. Well, as we wrap up here, team, we, like any good finance organization, we have multiple ways of calculating how many shows we've done. We have, shows with guests. We have shows with guests, including special episodes, shows with guests, not including special episodes, but plus or minus, this is the 100th Close of Business Tuesday. So thank you to Albert and Tammy and Chanel and Ariel, everybody behind the scenes who's making this all work. And then the last thing we were going to do just for fun, even though it was not a fun thing, but yesterday Colin Powell passed away. I think he's a hero for all of us in so many ways, particularly in a time like this. So we're going to attach to today's blast Colin Powell's 13 lessons he learned in his distinguished life. So in addition to the sustainability report, take a look at those too. So let me wrap there. Say thanks to everybody. We'll be back later this week with some more India stuff. But Castlen and Gary, can't thank you enough. Fantastic.